Hello, how's everyone doing today? I'm here with, this is a Live Free Die Old, episode 2. I'm here with special guest Yasha Yankis. I think that's how you pronounce his name. He is a
That's
piano
correct.
player and an anarchist. How are you doing today?
I'm doing well, thank you.
Very nice. So I guess my first topic, which I know is one that I think, disagree with, is voting. I think that voting is pointless, but because no matter whether you vote or not, the government exists. It's a scam, and therefore it's not an act of aggression. That if you're walking down the street and a mugger says, "Give me a $5 bill or a $10 bill," and you say, "Oh, a five," you're not consenting to being robbed. You're choosing the best of all possible alternatives, and therefore uh, he's going to rob you whether you vote or not. What
Which
is
is
what is
tr-
your response to that?
which is true. The government will rob you whether you vote or not. I'm not denying that. And
Right,
government could exist without voting. That is true. I mean,
right.
I mean, during many millennia we had monarchs and no one voted under monarchies. So I'm not saying that. My argument is not that if everyone stopped voting, there wouldn't a government would necessarily just disappear immediately, but my argument is that while voting does not necessarily um, enable the very existence of government, I do think it necessarily contributes to the legitimacy of government at the very least, and in most cases, it's more than merely that. I think that probably 99% of voters have at least some malicious intentions behind their actions, and I think one of the factors when assessing criminality is deciphering intentions. Like if an individual is committing a crime, if an individual killed someone, did um, is mens rea present? That is, did he intend to kill the person, or was it involuntary? And so those who are voting, what they are doing is voluntary, right? No one's forcing them to vote; they're choosing to do so. And if someone is choosing to vote for an extortion increase, meaning a tax increase, they did so voluntarily. No one forced them to do so. That was their will, and so I think these people are willingly attempting to rob someone. So not all acts of voting are equally wrong, and I think it's a spectrum. I don't think any act of voting is completely moral, um, and I don't think all voters are evil. I think some people who do vote, that is, in particular anarchists who vote, probably their intentions are going to be pretty much pure, but I still don't think it's completely moral because at the very least it legitimizes government. But if your intentions are to rob someone, to increase taxes, or to put a law into an effect which prohibits a non-violent action such as drug use, prostitution, or whatever, if it's your intention to incarcerate people for non-violent actions such as drug use, prostitution, or resisting extortion, then I do think you're guilty of something.
Well, then it matters how you vote, right? So let's say there's a vote on should drugs be legal or illegal, and you vote that they should be legal. Would that now the person's voting, but they're voting to not to, but to allow behavior.
Well, it's my position here is a little nuanced. A particular mark you make on the ballot itself is not an act of aggression. So no, I don't think voting against. I don't think voting against uh, a law that prohibits a nonviolent action such as drug use or prostitution is aggression. But I do think just taking possession of a ballot still somehow legitimizes the government because you're participating in the democratic process, which is an immoral system based on tyranny of the majority, and I think just to participate in it at least implicitly endorses the system, even though you may be trying to to vote to reduce the negative effects of the system, but you're still at least implicitly endorsing it. At the very least, the reason I don't vote is because I used to vote, but I no longer vote. In this recent primary election, I destroyed my ballot, just at least to document that I no longer vote. So the reason I no longer vote is because I feel that if I do, when I tell other people not to vote, because how dare you claim to have a say in my life? I feel if I'm doing the same thing, if I'm voting, I'm a hypocrite, because am I not claiming to have a say in other people's lives just by taking possession of a ballot? Because it's just by taking possession of a ballot, I think you're implicitly saying that you're not necessarily trying to rob someone or abduct someone, but it's at least an implicit statement, or at least it's commonly viewed as an implicit statement that you have the right to do so, even if it's not your intention to do so. If that makes any sense.
It makes sense. I certainly disagree that most voters have immoral intentions. I think many people are bullied into voting. Well, if you don't vote, you can't have an opinion, so people vote so they can have an opinion. People believe it's their civic duty. People believe they're voting for the lesser evil. Now, I think voting is a waste of time. I don't think it does anything. And no one is going to enter the political arena to have less power, right? They're just telling people what they want to hear. So I think it's stupid, but I don't think it's an act of aggression, because I think saying it's an act of aggression is very problematic, because you're allowed to use violence in defense. So the logical implication of voting as an act of aggression is that you can use violence to prevent someone from voting, right?
Yeah, that is true. If X is an act of aggression, then yes, that does imply that you have the right to use violence in order to prevent said act of aggression. And the only reason, and I'll be honest, of course I wouldn't, because it's not practical, but say the situation were different. Say only a very small percent of the population, say some oligarchy were voting, and and the masses weren't, then I don't think very many people would have a problem with trying to forcibly overthrow this small oligarchy of the population, when they're trying to impose tyranny on the masses by majority vote. But when it's the masses themselves, it somehow becomes legitimate.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's not actually the masses, because only about 50% of the population who's eligible to vote votes, and so under 50% of the people vote, and even if a majority of that is a majority of the minority is certainly no majority. So it's even a facade that we have majority rules anyway. If we have majority rules, there'd be anarchy, because the majority doesn't vote.
That's true, but when I say the masses, I mean masses of people vote. It's still millions. It's right. Still a large fraction of the masses, though it is a minority. It's not like an oligarchy. If it were only the politicians voting and no one else, then that would be an oligarchy.
Mm-hmm. So I agree that voting is a waste of time, but do you think that anarchy, besides just being moral, do you think it will come to fruition, and if so, how?
Well, I can't predict the future. I do not know when, or well, I do know that anarchy will come into fruition at some point in time. Anarchic societies such as medieval Iceland, medieval Ireland, and the American Wild West have existed. So if an anarchic society existed once, it certainly can exist in the future. I think, as things currently stand, there are practicality. I mean, there are certainly practical difficulties in establishing an anarchist society, because if 99% of the population disagrees with anarchy, then there they're probably going to, if the government were suddenly abolished immediately, then they probably would try to just establish another government, because I really don't trust people. I think there are a lot of there are a lot of narcissistic assholes out there. Oh, I sound like a hypocrite. I guess I'm a narcissistic asshole myself. But there are a lot of narcissistic assholes, nonetheless, who really want to impose their will on others. They want to see non-violent individuals in jail, and if they really want that, then you're not going to have a free society. So I do see the possibility of anarchy being established on the small scale if a group of anarchists could get together, and there are enough anarchists to establish a rather small society. If I'd estimate there's probably something like 1 million anarchists right now. Well, that's enough to establish some society. So if you could get 1 million anarchists together, and if they could congregate upon a specific locality, then they could definitely establish their own society. Of course, the only problem would be, surrounding governments would try to eradicate this, any such secessionist movements. These governments would commit genocide against anarchists, and probably the populations of said governments, they would be propagandized into supporting such genocidal wars against peaceful secessionists slash anarchists. And so yeah, there are great practical difficulties in establishing an anarchist society. But if we could get around the problem of invasion by governments, then yes, I think it definitely could be established, and even in the near future. And I think sometime we will. Maybe sometime we'll be able to develop some, I don't know, some very powerful defensive technology, such as laser weapons, and if these weapons could get into the right hands, which of course there's no guarantee of that, but if anarchists could get a hold of these weapons, then they could build their own society, and anyone who attacks them, any government forces that try to invade them, would be immediately vaporized. And this is all speculation. So I don't know when an anarchist society will be established, but I do know that our numbers are growing, and so I think it's inevitable that it will happen at some point. And if there's just one secessionist region, then it could pretty easily be quelled. Now, if there are many secessionist movements in a lot of different locations throughout the United States, then that would be more difficult to destroy all of them. So I think one strategy would be perhaps to kind of covertly establish several different anarchist regions at once, and I think that would give the government a harder time.
Right. Yeah. I guess I didn't ask you this in the beginning, but I'm sort of curious. What brought you to anarchy?
Well, there are several factors, one of which will be extremely unpopular, but I'll start from the beginning. My parents are one factor. By the way, can you hear me all right? Was I speaking a little too far away from the microphone at one point? Was my voice trailing off?
You're fine.
Okay, so first of all, my parents are one factor. They're not anarchists, but they're small government types, and so since they exposed me to small government ideology, I was close to anarchist. I wasn't, but I was close to anarchist from a very young age. I'd say as young as 8 years old. I hated the government. I hated pretty much every law except, well, basic laws like do not kill, do not steal, etc. And I was incensed by all these stupid government regulations, like you have to mow your lawn. Who's the city to tell you what to do on your own lawn? Or one thing that I was incensed by, I remember I was 8 and a half at the time. There's the stupid law that that haircutters must place some kind of protection around the neck of their customers for sanitation purposes, and and even if the customer refused, they could be fined, and and this is, I guess, it's a little of a petty issue. It's just one example of stupid government interference. Who's the government to tell me what to do? It's a I mean, any voluntary uh, any voluntary interaction between individuals should be legal. But these are some things that I was incensed by at a very young age, because I just thought it's just ridiculous. But of course, as I got older, my views became more nuanced, and I did go through a period, I'd say, in my preteen to early teenage years of apathy. But um, I'd say around 17 or 18, I again became more interested in politics, and probably at one point I would say that Ron Paul was my greatest inspiration. He's not anymore. Now I'd say people like Hans Hermann Hoppe, Lysander Spooner, and to name some modern, some currently existing individuals, Christopher Cantwell. I am a fan of Christopher Cantwell, um, but one thing that um, started me on my journey to anarchism. At one time, I was kind of a crazy conservative, in the sense that I was, and I still have some conservative leanings, but I was incensed by the moral degeneracy of the moral decline that I believe so many Western societies were facing. Um, Particularly feminism. That was one issue which, it may seem strange, but I was infatuated with the cause of opposing feminism, and now it's well, I
It's
guess
all right. No one sees your face.
I guess mostly for personal reasons, because uh, I have every right to believe this. I prefer the traditional family structure, and I thought that the government was at least one of the major factors in the decline of the traditional family. Through, I mean, in the past, uh, many families could survive on a single income, and due to inflation and increasing cost of living, not only due to inflation, but the profusion of regulations and direct extortion and so on and so forth, the government was definitely at least one major contributing factor to the destruction of the family. Uh, and so, for example, the welfare system promotes this. It certainly promoted this profusion of single parents. The social security system discourages saving, and so the overall the overall effect of the welfare state was a decline of moral values and the destruction of the family. I was particularly concerned with government education, because government education is indoctrination. The whole system is in place to cultivate this um, basically this fanatical worship of government. And so that if the government can control the education, they can make people actually believe in nonsense such as forced redistribution and central banking and so on and so forth, by distorting history and economics and so forth, and more subtle means such as of cultivating this nationalistic fervor, such as the Pledge of Allegiance, and um, the government does not want strong families. Um, so I think the education system was one means of at least partially um, supplanting the family with the state, because due to government education, children start to see the state as the family, and also they could, well, for one thing, the education system is very heavily feminist, right? They definitely promote feminist ideology, and so because I hated feminism, I decided I also must hate pretty much the entire government, the Federal Reserve, the welfare state, the um, extortion racket, the government education complex, and so and then I start to focus less and less on feminism and more on government. Um, because for a while I was infatuated with opposing feminism, but then um, I realized that the fundamental problem is not feminism but extortionism, and feminism is only a secondary problem, um, which extortionism just promotes. As and there are many secondary problems. The fundamental problem being legalized crime, um, that is government, and so since I opposed all forced redistribution, I believed it was theft. Um, in order to be logically consistent, I ultimately decided, uh, within a year of discovering Ron Paul, that um, I must necessarily oppose all forced redistribution. I mean, all taxation, because all taxation is forced redistribution. Even taxation for the purpose of funding courts, police, and military. It's I mean, to force an individual to fund a specific court, police, or military. How is that different from forcing individuals to fund a specific um, school, road, or hospital or fire department? How is it any different? It's courts, police, and military, like just like anything else, just like education and healthcare, they're services that could be provided on the market. So how is funding just those three items by extortion any different than funding everything else by extortion? So ultimately, I ran out of excuses to support any degree of legalized extortion.
Right. Um, how would you define feminism? Because feminism is one of those words that means a lot of things to different people. So how would you define it?
Well, that's a complicated question. My definition of feminism used to be um, very traditional, and I mean, the traditional definition, and um, and now it might be slightly different, but I'd say, let me think about it for a second. I guess I thought of feminism as basically the agenda to destroy the family and emasculate men. But what I think feminism really amounts to is um, not just my personal opinion, but feminism in general seems to be uh, female advocacy. Excuse me, advocacy. So it's feminism is not. Um, I guess it could possibly be about equality, but generally it isn't. I'm not about equality, but neither is feminism. Uh, Feminists advocate women's rights and female privileges, in many cases at the expense of men's rights and men's privileges. And maybe to some extent I'm the opposite, but I'm just stating what the facts are. Not that
All right.
I'm against women's rights per se. I think in general that both genders should have the same basic rights, of course, and the same basic
Right.
responsibilities, like you can't kill, you can't steal, etc. I think anyone could own property and so forth. And I do personally prefer the traditional family structure, but I'm not saying the man always needs to be the head of household. I mean, I'm if if a man is willing to accept it, I'm okay with. I'm okay if there are some relationships in which both spouses are equal, or even the woman is in charge. But what I don't like is the notion that if the man is in charge, by definition, he's this evil oppressor, and we can't tolerate that. I'm willing to tolerate um, it if in some cases the woman is in charge, but feminists aren't willing to tolerate the opposite.
Um, I think my next question is it's somewhat unrelated, but how much do you think that government? Do you think that government is sort of this force which propagandizes the people and tells the people what to think and what to feel and how to act, or do you think that government represents is really a reflection of what society is, and that the reason that and the reason different governments are coerced, why one government is more coercive than another, is because of the value set of the society that the government happens to be living.
Honestly, I think it's some of both. I don't think there's a simple answer to that question. Um, for one thing, if the government has to reflect the prevailing values of the masses to some extent, otherwise no one would support it. So it has to be representative to some, so yeah, to some extent it does reflect the prevailing cultural attitudes, but not entirely. For one thing, the government itself is able to shape cultural attitudes by means of indoctrination, primarily through the education system. And so, if the government is able to mold people's minds at a very young age, then the government basically could remold the entire culture. Um, well, um, and of course the parents would still have some influence, um, but the influence uh, of the, well, let's put it this way: the defensive power of the parents against the government would weaken with every generation. It's intergenerational indoctrination. So first, when the government implements um, government-controlled education, um, the parents have not been indoctrinated, but you have one you have one generation of, say, maybe partially indoctrinated individuals, because, well, the parents may have um, served as something of a buffer against that indoctrination, but it becomes weaker with every generation, because next generation, the children are not only um, they're not only being indoctrinated directly by the government, but they're being raised by parents who were at least partially indoctrinated by the government. So it's a ratchet effect which becomes stronger with every generation. So the government definitely shapes the culture, and it shapes public opinion to a large extent by not only control of the education system, but also control of the media, because we don't have a free market in media at all. Well, currently we have a lot more with the internet. There isn't much regulation of the internet, if any, yet, but the mainstream media is completely controlled by the FCC. If you're a media mogul and you if you if you try to broadcast information or ideas that are not approved by the government, they could just withdraw your license. And so we don't have a free market in the media or education at all. And even if the media is nominally private, it's still government controlled. And so as a result, yes, the government definitely controls public opinion. But at the same time, if you were indoctrinated, just because you were indoctrinated to believe in extortion, if you dogmatically adhere to that belief, just because you were indoctrinated into believing that, I mean, one could have been indoctrinated to believe in, say, the genocide of all Jews or all Italians or whatever. That doesn't mean I'm going to forgive you for it just because you were raised that way. I'm still going to I'm still not going to view you as a friend or an ally.
Right. Mm-hmm. No, I agree, which is why I get a lot of flack, and it's weird, but there seems to be a double standard when judging police and judging the military. You know, it's okay to call cops pigs. It's okay to hate them. It's okay to say, well, it doesn't matter if it's their job. They chose that career. It's not an excuse. But when it comes to the military, oh, there must be heroes. You can't criticize them. They're risking their lives. What are you doing? You're just sitting home in your ass. You wouldn't have freedom if it weren't for them. Why do you think there's this double standard, even among people who are not fans of police, where it's okay to criticize cops, but not the military?
Well, I'm I'm not sure I have a definitive answer to this, but I will say that troop worshippers are some of the most infuriating and despicable people I've met, and I've run into I've I've run into some conflicts with these people. I remember one bitter argument that I found myself trapped into a couple of years ago with this fanatical troop worshiper, and she asked me the question, "Do you support the troops?" And so of course I was honest. Now, if I were ever to be questioned by a troop worshiper again, I wouldn't be as I didn't even raise my voice once, but if I wouldn't be so nice. I just call them out on their bullshit if this ever were to happen again. But the whole thing about troop worship, it's akin to racism, or well, not necessarily racism, but it's it's an insane anti-human form of nationalism, which I believe is culturally ingrained into this society. It's promoted by the government education complex, and unfortunately well, by people in general. I mean, parents will raise their kids to believe in this nonsense as well, but they believe you have to support the troops. They don't say support troops per se. They say support American troops just because they're American, and that assumes that an American life is somehow worth more than a life of anyone else just because he was born in a certain geographical region. So if an American troop is killed in battle, it's a tragedy just because he's an American. And if, say, an Iraqi troop is killed in battle, it's we're to rejoice just because he's an Iraqi, and they never consider that. What if the Americans are on the wrong side, or what if neither side is completely in the right? And so, just because they're protecting us, we're or they're supposedly protecting us, and of course they're not. Just because they're supposedly protecting us, we're obliged to support them, and I think that's very selfish, because just if someone is supposedly protecting me by means of killing innocent people, I don't even if okay. What if person X thinks is just what if person X is some kind of crazy person? He thinks that he needs to kill innocent people in order to protect me. Am I going to support him just because he thinks he's protecting me? Obviously not. And so, but as for your question, why this double standard? Well, I I don't know. Well, the I think the way most people think of it is that the troops are fighting for some noble cause. I guess they're defending the country, and they're defending America. They're defending the nation, and people are indoctrinated into believing in the lie that is the nation, where the police are not necessarily defending the nation as a whole. They're just defending some locality. So it's not as they're not on as glorious, supposedly glorious of a mission as the troops are, and I guess the troops are in much greater. Cops are always in danger, but troops are troops are placing themselves under much greater danger than cops are. Right? Troops are much more likely to be killed in battle than than cops are going about their day-to-day business. And so I guess these are some reasons why people worship the troops and not the cops. That was kind of a long answer, but
Right.
I'll
I
leave it
also think I agree with you to a certain extent. I think the two reasons, in my opinion, are one, it's far away. So I don't, cops are abusive. You could see it with your own eyes. You have friends who have maybe been victimized of it. So it's much closer to you. Whereas, what happens far away, you don't really know about. I think that's one answer. And two, I agree with what you said, that most people, value most people in America value American lives is worth more than someone else's lives. So, two people bomb a bunch of buildings on September 11th, and what is the government's way to deal with this issue? Attack a bunch of other people who happen to be from that country. Completely insane, and people are fine with it. Which is why it's very depressing. Which is why it seems like we're losing the battle.
Yeah.
But brave new world. This is where we are. Um, but yeah, I think you have to keep fighting though. You can't let them win, and you have to die trying. I think. But do you think that we should call ourselves anarchists? Because that word itself has a lot of baggage. Do you think that what's the best way to market it? What do you say?
Well,
maybe I'm asking the wrong person. I don't know.
To be perfectly honest, I like the word anarchist specifically because it's so provocative. I like using a provocative term. As for whether it's a good way of marketing anarchism to call it by what it actually is, well, I'd say there's nothing to lose, because you're going to be say people have preconceived notions of anarchism. Even if you don't use the term, well, they're going to accuse you of being an anarchist. They're still going to know what you're talking about. As soon as you say government is an organized crime syndicate, it's by definition illegitimate. They're going to call you a crazy anarchist. So why not just admit it?
Right. I agree. I also like the provocation. Myself. But I enjoy pissing people off.
Yeah, me too.
And I'm pretty good at it. One of my few talents. But yes, I think we should admit it. I'm not really a fan of marketing it. I think you just have to tell the truth as you see it. I don't think you should be a condescending jackass. I don't think you should say, and I'm not a fan of what a lot of libertarians do, which is anyone who disagrees with me is evil. You're a sheep. See, I see the light, but you're just a sheep. You're stupid. I don't think we should be condescending. I don't think we should be high and mighty. I think humility is a good quality. But I think we should be honest about what our view is. We shouldn't try to soften it. We shouldn't try to lie about it, because, and this is where I disagree with people like Kathy, I don't want people to become anarchists and libertarians who don't agree with the philosophy, and then enter the movement and then taint it and ruin it.
Do you think that Kathy is tainting and ruining the movement?
No, I don't know. I'm going to have her on my show soon. I'll find out. But I don't know. What do you think?
Well, I've listened to some of her speeches and interviews. I have mixed feelings about her, and in one recent discussion on the Voluntary Virtues Network, on her recent show, well, it seems that she indicated that she was a stronger anarcho-capitalist at one time than she is now. She was a pure anarcho-capitalist, and now she said she still is, but she said she's been reading some some literature by, or maybe some she didn't specify, but anyway, some writing by ex-libertarians, and so she said that she's I guess in her view, she has a little more of an open mind now. I don't know if I agree with that, but I strongly disagree with her method of promoting liberty. I don't think it's effective. I watched this one speech at a Tea Party event where um, um, the theme was "check your privilege," and yes, she was calling for smaller government. She was advocating small government solutions, but the but the reason you should advocate less government or no government is not because of the privilege issue. I think you have to. I think a better argument is that government is morally wrong or impractical or both. I mean, really, who cares about privilege? That should be secondary. Well, of course, leftists do, but who cares what leftists think? But she was speaking to a Tea Party audience, and well, I don't think um, I don't think that's a good means of selling the message of liberty to conservatives, because they probably are not going to be receptive to the concept of privilege. Now, she may have a point that if you're selling the message of liberty to leftists, they're probably going to care about privilege. Now, I really don't care. I'm not going to compromise with them. I'm not going to pretend I care about this privilege nonsense just so I could win them over. But anyway, I don't think it's even an effective means of promoting liberty, because I think in order to advocate liberty, you pretty much have to have a strong philosophical grounding in the principles of liberty. So if you're going to be appealing to nonsense concepts such as privilege, you're probably going to just be you're probably just going to end up strengthening the preconceived notions that these leftists are possessed by. If they're going to if you're promoting the concept of privilege, you're basically telling them to continue analyzing social issues using a flawed methodology, because there's no such thing as white male privilege. It's maybe you could point to a few isolated instances of white male privilege, but it's certainly not it's not a systemic phenomenon. And I think there's a lot more more minority and female privilege than there is white or male privilege.
Mm-hmm. Well, there's a lot of male privilege in divorce court, as you know. Yeah. You mentioned briefly ex-libertarians, and I'm very skeptical. I don't really think there are ex-libertarians. I think these are dishonest, and I say this mainly based on the rhetoric, because a lot of these ex-libertarians say, I used to be a libertarian when I was a teenager, and I felt isolated, and then, later I realized that, we live in a society, and that selfishness is not a way to live life, and these are just stereotypes of libertarianism. These are not what people who are libertarians believe. So these ex-libertarians were never libertarians. Otherwise, they would be familiar with what libertarianism is. They wouldn't criticize libertarians from someone who's not familiar. What I think these ex-libertarians are sadists who are dishonest and want to portray libertarianism as some philosophy that only teenagers who feel alone have. And therefore, instead of just saying, well, libertarianism is just a view for teenagers, they're lying and they're saying, oh, I understand libertarianism because I used to be a libertarian.
Yeah, I think that's true in many cases, but unfortunately there are some actual ex-libertarians. There are some individuals that embraced anarchism at one point in time and later abandoned it. And I've seen such cases. At least
that's weird. That's weird, though. Why? You go from I think violence is okay and government is a propagandist machine to violence is good and government can be trusted. I mean, how do you go there?
I don't know, but one argument I heard is that one individual said that he realized that he was an anarchist, but he realized that that morality is subjective, aggression is subjective. Therefore, he was compelled to embrace utilitarianism.
Did he say this to your face?
This was not in a discussion with me. It was a YouTube.
If it was, you should have punched him and called his bluff.
It was a YouTube comment I saw.
You should have punched him if it was with you, and when he gets upset, you say, "What? I thought morality is subjective, man. I was testing the theory." But yeah, morality is subjective. Bullshit. Rape someone and say, "Hey, morality is subjective, bitch."
Yeah,
this is just an excuse to not be criticized for your immoral behavior.
Yeah, exactly. Those who say morality is subjective, they're just saying, "Don't criticize me." The excuse that they will often put forth is I'm entitled to my opinion. That's not what they really mean. They mean I'm entitled to do whatever I want, regardless of other people's rights.
Yes. Don't criticize. Who's to say I'm wrong? Well, me. If you violate my rights, and what's as Walter Block said, someone was saying we have an overpopulation problem, and Walter Block responded, you hypocrite. You have it within your power to reduce the human population by 1.
Yeah.
So anyone who says that violence, that morality is subjective, if people don't, why are you complaining if people victimize you, right? And it's weird because there's this contradiction where a lot of the same people who say morality is subjective are obsessed with rights. They'll talk about we need rights for this group, rights for this group, right for that group. Morality is subjective and we need more rights. Make up your mind.
Yeah.
But it's inconsistent, right? Like the leftists are obsessed with equality and diversity. Those are opposites.
Yeah, right? They claim that morality is subjective, but then next minute they'll claim that their opinion is the only right one.
Right, yes. Morality is subjective and you're oppressing me. Who's to say I'm oppressing you? Morality is subjective. Yeah. It's mainstream, so they're shielded from critique. If your view is popular, you don't actually have to have good arguments, unfortunately.
Yeah, of course, if you don't really have to have an argument to support legalized extortion when millions of when pretty much everyone around you supports it.
Yeah. Well, I'm sure you're very popular with your views, right?
Of course.
Do you share these to people? Do you meet people and say, "Hello, I'm an anarchist. Let me tell you that"?
I've never met someone who said that, except myself.
No, but do you do that? Do you do that? I mean, I proselytize, and I'm not very popular, but I don't really give a shit. But do you?
Do I proselytize?
I mean, do you try to bring anarchy into the conversation?
I do indeed, quite frequently. Probably more frequently than I should.
Well, if you do it once, that's more frequently than you should, according to most people.
Yeah, of course. The mainstream view is politics and religion should not be discussed except in a semi-intimate setting, and even then, probably not.
Right.
Unless it's agreed upon, basically, and it's impolite, which I suppose it is.
I don't know. Why is it impolite?
What?
Why is it impolite?
Well, practically speaking, it's a pretty short way to start an argument.
Right. That's fun. I mean, I wouldn't recommend it on dates. Not a great way to get a second date.
Well, but it is a good way to screen people to make sure they're not they're not undesirable, because
Well,
if they
I
are
just,
undesirable, then why would you want to date them?
well, first of all, a few reasons. One, my view is they're not anarchists yet. So, maybe you can persuade someone, when they get to know you and they like you, and they admire you to accept anarchy. Just because a person you meet now on a first date isn't an anarchist doesn't mean the person's never going to be an anarchist, right?
Oh, yeah, I could see that. I mean, I'd never date an outright communist, but maybe a moderate, or someone who doesn't have a strong opinion at present. Just as long as they don't as long as they don't actively commit government. If they're apathetic, maybe someday they'll embrace anarchy. But now, if uh, I guess it's a matter of personal preference.
You don't even have to be empathetic, right? I mean, you mentioned on this interview that you used to be conservative, and you said you were very conservative, and you were passionate about it. And there are many anarchists who had very strong political beliefs before they were anarchists,
yeah, and
myself included. So, I think, there seems to be this intolerance of, it took me many years until I was an anarchist, but now anyone who's not an anarchist, they're just idiots. What were you?
well, actually, let me amend that. I said I was very conservative, but I wasn't a Republican or a conservative in the conventional sense. In fact, many things conservatives typically advocate, I did not. Even then, I opposed the drug war. I opposed prostitution bans, etc. I was mostly conservative on issues to do with family values
Right.
and economics, and so I was already I was a conservative libertarian um, with developing anarchist sympathies, I'd say, but I wasn't an anarchist yet. But I was a conservative libertarian hybrid, I guess.
Right. Right. So that's sort of how I view it. I also view it as, keep your friends close and your enemies closer.
Yeah, well, that depends which enemies, I guess. Practically, you could do that as long as they're not trying to kill you.
Well, just because someone's a statist doesn't mean they're trying to kill me. Most of them are trying to kill me indirectly. Well,
True.
yeah. And I don't know, everyone in my family is a statist, and I don't think they're trying to kill me.
Not directly, of course.
I don't know. I don't know. They don't like stirring the pot. Especially if you're old. Like, the only shot you have of anarchy is young generations and young people, which is why I think anarchists have to promote, more people in society, because old people are stagnant. Old people are not good for any type of moral progress ever. I'm not saying I hate old people. They're fun to talk to, but once you're in your 40s, you're set in your ways. And certainly if you're a senior citizen, you don't have much time left. You're not going to waste time and energy. So, the only way to really have any moral progress whatsoever in society is through young people, not through old people. Old people, in a world where there's mainly old people, you won't have much crime because how many senior citizens are going to rob people? But you're not going to have moral progress either.
That's true. It is possible for a middle-aged or older person to alter one's philosophical outlook, though it's much less likely, but I do know of some such cases.
Of a senior citizen? I mean,
Not of a senior citizen, but of a middle-aged individual who was an Obama supporter and became a libertarian Ron Paul supporter.
All right, that's very rare, I would imagine. Right? I mean, if you look at the liberty movement, it's people our age, mainly.
In general, but there are always exceptions.
And if it's not people our age, it's people who were in it at our age. Like Walter Block, Jeffrey Tucker, they were probably our age when they became anarchists. They weren't, 50 and became anarchists.
In general, yes.
Right. So, my grandparents are not becoming anarchists anytime soon. In fact, I talk to them and they'll probably think I'm nuts.
Yeah, no one in my family is becoming an anarchist. I think um, one or two of them might sympathize with anarcho-capitalism to some extent, um, but not in the sense of advocating it being implemented right now, but maybe at some point far in the future. But generally, I think there are three. I think there are three small government individuals in my not just my immediate but extended family. The rest, I think, are pretty much communists.
Huh. All right, communists. Well,
By
that's
communist,
like. Are you defining communist as anyone who's not a libertarian?
by communists, and I use the term a little loosely, but in this case, I mean leftists, as unfortunately most Jews are. I do come from a Jewish family as well.
I could tell based on your voice.
You could.
Yeah, you have the Woody Allen voice. Uh, you know, no offense. It's not a compliment, but no offense. Uh, yes, I can tell you're Jewish.
Yeah, I'm an atheist though, and
Right, so am I.
atheist slash agnostic. That is, I mean,
Right.
I'm not saying there's definitely no higher power, but if there is, we don't know what it is, and
Well,
there's no use speculating on. There's no use making decisions as though we do know exactly what some uh, imaginary higher power commands. That's ridiculous, and I uh, my parents have jokingly called me an anti-Semite because I reject all the dietary restrictions. I eat pork. I reject genital mutilation.
right, I do too. Well, as a libertarian, you must.
Yeah,
So, yeah. Why, your parents follow the rules? No, they're atheists too, right?
they're okay. I think I wasn't clear at one point in that interview on that previous interview on voluntary virtues. I said I come from a non-religious family, and I wasn't clear. What I meant is they don't believe in God. They don't believe God definitely exists. They're agnostics. However, they're more they're a lot more traditional than I am. My father comes from a very non-traditional background. He's from the Soviet Union, so of course tradition is suppressed there. Um, and my mother, on the other hand, comes from a deeply religious background, and she became an agnostic, and so I think they influenced each other. But still, they're, shall I say, they're Jewish nationalists, meaning that they have this a strong sense of loyalty to Jewish culture, so they still believe in these dietary restrictions. Not all of them, so it's strange. They're inconsistent, but the the more um, well, I guess they're what could be called reform. So the 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 ones that they're the food items that there's more of a, there's a more of a general consensus on a more general reversion to among Jewish people. I mean, a lot of Jews still hate pork, but you don't see a lot of Jews who would have much against shellfish. So they are against pork. They're against mixing milk and meat. They're not against shellfish. They're not against
They're not against
fish
shellfish,
with
but they
without
follow
scales.
meat and milk, huh?
So they kind of do pick and choose, but they do believe in, unfortunately, they do believe in genital mutilation, as many Jews to this day do still. So, and they're fervent supporters of Israel, which I don't. I've been on. I'll admit this. I've been on both sides of the issue, and now I really don't give a damn anymore. I don't
Yeah.
feel that passionately
I,
about that.
I don't really give a damn. I'm probably more on Israel's side. One, because they don't do suicide bombing.
That's true.
So you sort of have to be on their side. They're not blowing up hospitals. They're not blowing up pizza parlors. They're not attaching bombs to themselves. So at least the violence they do is soldier and in war, which is not justified, but it's certainly better than being a suicide bomber.
Yeah, I definitely.
Anyway, with that, it's great having you on. Love to have you on again. Take it easy.
Take it easy.
All right. Take care. Bye.
Bye.